Folks, we are still talking about half-year numbers. The banking season is here, and we are privileged and delighted to have the Group CEO for KCB Group, Paul. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Julian.
Asante sana.
Anytime. Thank you.
Paul, tough set of numbers. Tough set of numbers. Group level net earnings down 18%. NBK is back in the red. You have issued a guidance as far as asset quality is concerned. Q2 seems to have been very difficult.
I'll actually say it's Q1. If you look at so overall the results are for H1, yeah. And I'll take Q1 to be the most difficult for Kenya businesses. But I think, I hope, and everybody sees the numbers, the top line is doing amazingly well. That's not in doubt. But like Julians, I've told you in the past, it's been a year since I took over. I committed to cleaning up the book, taking the tough calls. It just reflects what I told you in the first of those interviews. Yes, there's what is constant. You can see liquidity was a material issue across the industry. I think Q1, there were banks that were taking 100 million deposit at 13%. Just tells you how difficult it was. At that time, most of the entities hadn't even received risk-based pricing. Who are you going to lend to? So a real material issue, particularly on liquidity on Q1. Well, when you look at KCBK, to be precise, it's a provisions issue. Downgraded 34 billion in that period. 99% legacy, making us take that tough call. It's the right time. You take it early. Like I said, as a new CEO, don't carry baggage. Yeah. Let the organization to be light downstream. I'm confident on the KCB Kenya performance going forward. The hard decisions have been made. When I look at the National Bank, quietly, you probably have seen, and I've said in the investor conference, we actually had a restructuring. Many people did know. We did release staff on voluntary early leaver scheme. So there is a cost element on the restructuring on both KCB Kenya and National Bank. The recent case that is in the public domain, Basil Crisco versus NBK, we fully provided for it. We took the hit in H1 for the entire value. Other people will say, do you spread it through the year? I'm not that profile of a person. I take the pain once. If you strip out that hit as well as the restructuring, NBK is actually profitable. Good news about NBK is we'll go live on the core banking system harmonization that I've always talked about. The project is actually in full steam. And like I've said in the past, end of the year, back end, 100%. One shared services for the organization. Let me say, you can agree with the decisions in the court or not. You can have all your cases, but when it's determined, you can be aggrieved behind closed doors. You take the hit. I took the call as a leader today to take that hit completely. So I look at the stock of NPLs for the two entities in the business and believe finally you've got a full grip of what it is and what you're dealing with. Maybe it's just an opportune time to say, I started a meeting 7:30 on an NPL name with the customer. Those are the conversations I want to have, because how do we get customers out of this position? When you have the full stock and you've taken that hit, then you can run your recovery conversations. So I want to run the organization like Julian.
So Paul, 12 months ago when we sat down with you, we talked about reclassifying about 9 or 10 names. Right now you're mentioning you downgraded 34 billion worth of a book. And the question I'm sure the market is asking, is there an end in sight to this reclassification by KCB Group? And that's what I was asking last year. Do you feel there's a risk the market could get to a point where it just overlooks the guidance you give?
I think you're right. I mean, that can be a challenge. You take, when you take over a role, you take a look at what you have, you make your assessment. My leadership approach is it was 12 months, take a call. In June last year, if you remember, I took that call. Comp through to avoid this credibility issue. make that final call. Because as a leader, they will only give you X amount of time for you to take that call. I can bet that we've taken what needs to be taken. And you'll see what save of the Basil criticals kind of cases which I cannot predict, you'll see the performance going forward.
Okay, interesting. You've mentioned the restructuring exercise. I'm just curious, how much did it cost the bank?
I think because it was a voluntary early leavers, we were looking at around 400 staff across the two entities. Looking at around 2 to 2.5 billion as a final. I think you've got to say, if you're bringing the two shared services together, you've got an opportunity downstream. So we had actually budgeted for 3, so we still have opportunity to accommodate voluntary early leavers.
I see. Paul, looking at your income statement, interest expense is up significantly. And when I pencil through the numbers, it's actually a KCB Kenya affair. You are really ramping up expensive deposits, and I'd imagine a bank of your scale would not be really on the hunt for such deposits. But what's going on?
I think, like I said, Q1 liquidity was tight in the market. We were heavy in CBK window. It doesn't come cheap, Julian's. The government tabs are dried up for many of the organizations or banks that typically rely on that side. The good news is you can see we exited June with 0 exposure on that window. So the strategies post Q1 paying back. Reflecting in that position. Today, I think really there's still a lot of homework to be done on liquidity, because you're competing at the end of the day, Julians. You are in the market. You're competing with the infra giving 17%. Yeah. So there is going to be competition around that. And also for entities that typically lend, and we do lend and we do push, you've got to get a balance around it. Yeah. So out of the woods from that angle, most of that cost was in Q1. That will ease, but we are just saying we are competing with other options. That's why we kept our focus just in the way it is. I think from September then we will look and see what that. And again, it's just don't promise what you're not sure about.
Okay. And the yield on your loans, when you look at it, especially from the perspective of we are in pretty much a loan repricing cycle following the risk-based pricing approvals, do you feel that the numbers are coming through in the half year the way you expected them?
I think we got the approvals for risk-based pricing in July. Oh, okay. Yeah, so those numbers don't reflect in the first half of the year. But I think, Julians, let me probably pronounce what many don't. That stock of 182 billion is actually earning you almost nothing. Yeah? That's the elephant in the room for me and what I need to tackle, right? You can look at, on average, you will see on average the number. I have to be the one asking myself what that stock is worth. And taking the right quantum and ring fencing it and taking action around it is actually will also address the question you're asking.
Okay. The last time we sat, Paul, you told me there was a special team set up to chase recoveries, especially just because of the size of that book, which I remember telling you is almost a bank by itself. How much has been recovered in the period we are reviewing, and what are you pushing going forward?
So we did recover 32 billion, if I recall the number correctly. And you can see it almost offset with the downgrades. We did recover 32 billion, and you don't see that unless there's a breakdown, right? The team is doing well. I think Julian says it has to be a partnership with the customers. Don't kill the customer, but also demand of the right resolution for the customers. The Nation published the other day that KCB is leading in placing entities under receivership. It's fine because you don't go away from fact. But I can tell you, we get to that point where we've worked on all the other options and see opportunities on two fronts. One, in that business making money and being able to put that in an escrow account and be able to pay that. Or two, that options of somebody else being able to run it in a more viable way. And then you get a resolution. The entities that you've seen us put on receivership, it's been a journey. There are a lot of other conversations about, disposing securities. It takes time. It reflects on the timing on the market. But I would wish that most of them that we work out a plan for them to come back.
Okay. Paul, you spoke about tight liquidity, and the latest intervention by the market regulator is to introduce a corridor within which the interbank is expected to play. How do you see this impacting the market?
I think if you look at that, my take is it's not just the regulator. We've been partners in trying to find solutions. Because at the end of the day, if we don't bring in the interbank into play, we felt as Kenya bankers that we were struggling to have that. I think Julian's my take is tight times in the way we are requires all partners to be on the table. It's a guideline. It's not something that I would say it's imposed on us. We just have to have some discipline and understanding that any action that we take, our treasurers take, has an intended consequences if not correctly considered. So I personally see it's a positive development. It depends on where a party sits, but there's been very, very good level of engagement with the regulator. There's been open space for us to interact, and I must commend them for that.
Paul, I've asked you this question before, and allow me to ask it again, having looked at half-year numbers. From a capital adequacy standpoint, KCB gets me a bit worried. And I'm curious as to whether you share this sentiment. And also, will NBK need recapitalization further down the road, given what we have seen yesterday, especially from a core capital standpoint?
Yes, expected the NBK one for sure, Julian. I think there is pressure on KCB Kenya, for sure, on capital. But you would see that and attribute that to, the payment for TMB. That strained KCB Kenya. Because remember, they had to pay it as dividends to group for group to pay for the acquisition of TMB. The first half of the year, you can see they've narrowed that gap. Because of the machine it is, it will generate sufficient capital to cover the gap. But we intend to take a tier 2 capital for KCB Kenya. And I think just like the CFO explained yesterday, you might have what you've borrowed already. There's just probably left 20% of what you borrow that you can use as part of capital, right, Julian? So do you keep that, or do you retire that and get what can count at a higher value for capital? So the team is looking at that option. NBK, the conversation is now what I call bottom up. So there's a discussion at their board to see what needs to be done. I can assure you there will be. You probably ask questions which the group board will ask that I'll need to answer. There has to be a different business case and run rate for that, to really please the group board. So there'll be hard questions about that capitalization. So the team is working through those numbers. It will come obviously to management before we go to the board.
And just indicatively, what ticket size would you be looking at for the tier 2 for KCB Kenya?
We're looking at $100 million for that, and it will most likely come in to replace debt that we had taken earlier on, that is not counting anymore significantly towards tier 2 capital computations.
Okay, and maybe just to push that a little further, what horizon are we looking at before this is injected in?
We're looking at September, October.
How is TMB panning out?
Early days. Ahead of our plan on numbers, but a bit of still homework for us to do to optimize the value that we can get from it, but really ahead of our plan for TMB. I think TMB can do a lot more from where I sit. The options that we do have, and there's something that I'm working on recently, and you can see me reflecting around it, is today we run treasury functions for KCB at business unit levels. I think I'm in that point where I think we need a group treasury function to optimize value from the various business units and the value that TMB brings. So that has received support from the board yesterday. So it's off the press for us. We think there's a lot more opportunity. If you see our business like Tanzania, the performance of that business in the last 5 or so years, I think if there was sufficient support from a group treasury and optimization perspective, you can do a lot more without you going even into a footprint expansion kind of a model. Yeah. So short answer is we will build capabilities at the group to help us optimize that opportunity.
Okay. And when you talk about the more opportunity at the group treasury function, I'm just curious, are you looking more at sort of cross-region syndication arrangements, or how will that look like?
I think so first there is opportunity for quality cross-syndication on debt itself, on lending. And I think that should be a bigger, better opportunity even for KCB Kenya, right? We've got a very significant transaction that we're just concluding between KCB Kenya and TMB. Those quality, high-value tickets, yes, but at the top end of the opportunity is something. But I think in terms of how do you optimize that liquidity within the group? That for me is a question that the treasurer would need to answer. And I'm not a subject matter expert to be able to wade into that area. So if Uganda is sitting, subject to regulatory environment obviously, with excess dollars, where is it best to place? It might not be within KCB entities, but where is the best place to get returns for it? If you've got the famous G2G, right? 258 billion, the about of, right? 158 of that equivalent is in foreign currency. Where is the best way to deploy it within that framework to make sure that when you are paying, you're going to make payments. You're not only ready to make payments, but you've been opportunistic with that tailwind, isn't it? So those are the things that you want that treasurer to do it as a group. Because as I said, if there's a business unit treasurer, they will optimize for the business unit. Yeah. And you've got to have a group think and bring that to life. Okay.
Still on TMB, how are we progressing from an efficiency standpoint? I remember this was one of the first questions I raised with you when I come through their numbers. Their cost-to-income ratio didn't sit too well with me. Yeah.
You're right. So the first thing is that we're trying to do is get them onto the same core banking platform as KCB. So that process is ongoing. Implementation is ongoing. Because, and I'll speak to a number of layers. So there's a technology layer, but they're very efficient on technology, I must say. But you need to bring them to the same platform for you to optimize what exists in the rest of the group. The second bit is, what more can you do from a digital perspective? I think we've got opportunity to try and work with them to deploy certain capabilities to improve the level of productivity. Granted, you've got 110 branches. You've got to build an ecosystem around those branches. And I think I will also say that you've got to bring in subject to obviously all the regulatory approvals, representation of KCB board members in there, so that you are collectively driving the entity together. That process is actually ongoing.
Okay. Paul, I really regret that I'm running out of time here, but to close this up, and you mentioned this, G2G, from a KCB perspective, how is it going? I tried to look through your numbers, and especially on the side of the letters of credit. How is it going for you?
I would say it's one of those tailwinds you thank God for, and they come through at a certain point. But I think, Julian, and I think I mentioned in the last interview, we had a very good portfolio, by the way, of our customers who participate on the OTS side of things. We had built a fantastic team, and in the trade side. Short of mentioning names, a fantastic team. That team brought the expertise to bear, under G2G. All banks were on the table when these engagements happened, and I want to make that absolutely clear. We were all on the table. Depends on who sees the opportunity, who moves a lot faster. I think there were concerns about how you build up the FCY to make the payments. Like I said, 158 equivalent, $1 billion of that is today in FCY. First payment will happen in September. We're good to go. So opportunities come in, become tailwinds, you become opportunistic around that. So far, I would say, it's worked for KCB. We've got a few banks that are already in it. We also have foreign banks that are participating, because I think there's the impression it's only KCB that is in it. I just want to use this opportunity to correct that. We just have an early mover advantage for this particular.
Okay. Paul, it has been mentioned to me that, and I'd just like to get clarification from you, that KCB's involvement in the Hustler Fund goes beyond the perception that it is largely heavy lifting on the credit scoring side, that potentially KCB has extended funding towards that. Is that a correct position or not?
Let me say no bank, right? So there are two banks that participate in Hustler Fund. So KCB is 80%, the other bank is 20%. No bank has put money into Hustler Fund at all. That I think needs to be very clear. The credit scoring model is bringing our expertise into the partnership to support in that process. The second one is, Julians, all of us came to partner with telcos as well as the banks and any other party that involved, using investments that you've already made, and you can call it idle capacity, to deliver a social impact proposal. That was for all parties. And thank you for asking. We do not have an exposure on Hustler Fund at all. The upside is, at the end of the day, there are lessons for all of us to draw from the data from the Hustler Fund. Yeah. So I keep asking my people, and so there must be, those that were in CRBs, that during the window managed to borrow. How are those people doing? Right? You got to ask that question and see what that tells you about your lending. But I think, Julian, the other point is, are there people that in the AAA, AA rated that are borrowing and repaying consistently in Hustler Fund, right? You can deduce a lot. It means the limit that they have on all the other systems don't meet their needs, right? If they follow that, they are paying you correctly on this other side as well, right? So it should then challenge us to try and say, what is it that we need to do differently in the market? And I'm actually glad that we played the role that we played.
Okay. My final question, Paul, is this market has had a long-running conversation about mark-to-market exposure, government securities, in light of what we are seeing around the yield curve. And of course, KCB plays significantly in this space. Any comment on that?
I think, you've got, Julian, to say, and my take is, you could have, you have investments you made in the past. Those you've got to play with how the market develops. It is for that reason that you need to play an active role to make sure that you are never under the water, right? It is us to play our role to make sure that we keep afloat on that. And any decision that you make going forward is reflective of right calls and right decisions. So far today, I think any placements that we've made it within governance and see the opportunity for it.